The wedding gown felt like a shroud. Marin Holloway stood at the altar of St. Crispin's Chapel, her hands trembling beneath ivory silk gloves that did not belong to her. Nothing here belonged to her. Not the cathedral, with its towering stained glass windows, casting fractured rainbows across the stone floor. Not the hundreds of guests in their finest attire, whispering behind gloved hands and painted fans. Not the man standing beside her, rigid as a marble column, his jaw set like he was enduring a punishment rather than speaking vows. Hadrian Voss, Duke of Ashworth, had not looked at her once. The priest's voice droned through the ancient words, syllables that should have meant forever, that should have kindled warmth in her chest. Instead, Marin felt hollow, a vessel being filled with someone else's purpose. Oh, she was 22 years old, standing in a gown borrowed from a duchess she had never met, marrying a man who had spoken perhaps 40 words to her in her entire life. 37 of those words had been about her brother, Tobias. Her throat constricted at the thought of him. Golden Tobias, with his easy laugh and careless charm. The brother who had filled every room he entered, who had been Hadrian Voss's closest companion since their days at Eton. The brother who had died 6 months ago in a riding accident that still made no sense to her. And now she stood in his shadow, even here, even at her own wedding. Do you, Hadrian Alistair Voss, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. 2 words. Flat. Mechanical. Like signing a business contract. Marin risked a glance at his profile. Hadrian was handsome in the way that ancient statues were handsome. Sharp cheekbones, dark hair swept back from a face that seemed carved for severity, storm-colored eyes that revealed nothing. He was 33 years old and carried himself like a man twice that age, burdened by invisible weights she could not name. He still did not look at her. And do you, Marin Elise Holloway, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? The chapel held its breath. Somewhere behind her, she heard her mother's quiet sob. Her father's absence was a wound that had not healed. He had died 3 months after Tobias, the grief finally stopping his weakened heart. 2 Holloway men, gone in half a year, leaving behind debts that threatened to devour everything, leaving behind Marin, the quiet one, the invisible daughter who had always stood in corners while Tobias blazed through ballrooms. I do. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. A small victory. The priest continued, but Marin barely heard him. She was aware of the weight of stairs pressing against her back. Society had been buzzing about this match for weeks. The Duke of Ashworth, one of the most eligible and elusive bachelors in England, suddenly announcing his engagement to a nobody. The plain, unremarkable sister of his dead friend. She knew what they whispered. Pity. Obligation. Guilt. None of them were wrong. The ring, Your Grace. Hadrian turned slightly, and for one breathless moment, his gaze found hers. Gray and fathomless, searching for something she could not identify. Then he looked away, taking her hand with clinical precision. The ring slid onto her finger, gold and cold. It fit perfectly, which meant someone had measured her without her knowledge. Another reminder that this marriage was an arrangement, orchestrated and executed with the efficiency of a military campaign. I now pronounce you husband and wife. No instruction to kiss the bride. Perhaps the priest sensed what Marin already knew. This was not that kind of marriage. Hadrian offered his arm with the same detached courtesy he might show a distant acquaintance. Marin placed her fingers on his sleeve, feeling the rigid tension beneath the fine wool of his coat. Together, they turned to face the congregation. Hundreds of faces stared back, curious, judging, calculating. And in that sea of strangers, Marin felt more alone than she ever had in her life. The organ swelled. They began the long walk down the aisle. Each step felt like sinking deeper into water she could not escape. She was the Duchess of Ashworth now, a title that meant nothing to her, a name that was not her own. Beside her, Hadrian's profile remained stone. She wondered if he regretted this already. She wondered if he resented her for existing, for being the obligation his conscience could not ignore. She wondered if he saw Tobias every time he looked at her face, searching for traces of the friend he had lost. Mostly, she wondered how long she would have to endure this gilded prison before she could find a way to disappear. She did not know then that disappearing would prove far more difficult than she imagined. She did not know that the man beside her had no intention of letting her go. 6 weeks earlier, the letter had arrived on a gray Tuesday morning. Maren remembered the exact color of the sky, the exact temperature of the tea growing cold in her cup, the exact pattern of raindrops streaking down the window of their modest sitting room in Cheapside, where the Holloway family had retreated after selling the country estate to pay Tobias's gambling debts. No one had told her about the gambling debts while Tobias was alive. No one had told her about much of anything. Her mother sat across from her, still wearing mourning black for both husband and son, her face gaunt with grief that had carved hollows beneath her eyes. Between them, the letter lay open on the table. Heavy cream paper embossed with a crest Maren recognized instantly. The Duke of Ashworth. "He wants to meet with us," her mother said, her voice papery thin. "Tomorrow. He says it concerns Tobias's affairs." Maren's stomach knotted. More debts, probably. More creditors her brother had charmed and deceived. She had spent the past 3 months untangling the wreckage Tobias left behind, discovering with each passing week that the golden brother she had adored was far more tarnished than she ever knew. "I'll handle it," Maren said quietly. "You shouldn't have to face this. You shouldn't have to face any of it." Her mother's hand found hers, trembling. "You're the only one left, Maren. The only one who stayed steady. I'm sorry. I'm so terribly sorry." Maren squeezed back, but she had no words of comfort left. She had been steady her whole life because no one noticed her enough to lean on. Tobias had been the comet, brilliant and burning. She had been the shadow that followed, or cleaning up the messes he left in his wake. Even in death, she was still cleaning. The Duke arrived precisely at 2 o'clock the following afternoon. Maren had dressed carefully in her least shabby gown, a gray muslin that matched the perpetual clouds over London. She had instructed their single remaining maid to serve tea in the cramped parlor that smelled faintly of damp, and she had sent her mother to rest, knowing the older woman's nerves could not withstand another confrontation with creditors. When Hadrian Voss stepped through the doorway, he seemed to fill the entire room. It was not merely his height, though he was tall. It was not merely his bearing, though he carried himself with the unconscious authority of a man born to power. It was something in his gaze, a weight that pressed against the walls, that made the modest furniture look even shabbier by comparison. "Miss Holloway," he bowed correctly, formally. "Thank you for receiving me." "Your Grace," she curtsied, hating how her voice wavered. "Please, sit." He did not sit. Instead, he stood by the window, looking out at the narrow street below, his hands clasped behind his back. The quiet stretched until Maren's nerves screamed. "I understand you've been managing your brother's estate," he said finally. "What remains of it?" "Yes. No point in pretending. The debts are significant. I know." He turned to face her, and again she felt that strange intensity in his attention. "I've settled them." Maren blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "All of them. The creditors have been paid. Your family owes nothing." The words did not make sense. She stared at him, waiting for the condition, the catch, the price that surely accompanied such impossible generosity. "Tobias saved my life once," Hadrian continued, his voice flat. "At school. A fire in the dormitory. He pulled me from the flames when everyone else ran. I told him then that I owed him a debt I could never repay. His mouth set into a hard line. I was right, but I can at least honor what remains of it. Marin's throat closed. She thought of Tobias, reckless and laughing, probably treating the whole incident as a grand adventure. Of course, he had never mentioned it. He collected heroic moments the way other men collected debts. I don't know what to say, her voice faltered. Thank you. Truly. There's more. She stiffened. Here it was. The price. Hadrian's expression did not change, but something flickered in those gray depths. Discomfort, perhaps. Or reluctance. Your family's situation remains precarious. Your mother's health is failing. Your income is non-existent. Even with the debts cleared, you face a future of genteel poverty at best. He paused. I have a proposal. Marin's pulse quickened. What kind of proposal? Marriage. The word dropped between them like a stone into still water. To whom? She heard herself ask, though she already knew. To me. The conversation that followed was the strangest of Marin's life. Hadrian laid out the arrangement with clinical precision. He needed a wife. Society expected it. His grandmother demanded it. And he had avoided the duty long enough. He did not want a love match. He did not want complications. He wanted someone who would manage his household competently, appear at necessary social functions, and otherwise leave him in peace. In exchange, Marin and her mother would be provided for completely. A London townhouse for her mother, with servants and an income that would ensure comfort for the rest of her days. For Marin, the title of Duchess, a fortune at her disposal, and the security she had never known. Why me? The question escaped before she could stop it. Hadrian's gaze flickered. Because you are Tobias's sister. Because I know you are sensible and steady. Because you will not expect from me what I cannot give. What he could not give, she understood. Love, affection, a real marriage in any sense that mattered. And if I refuse, then I will still ensure your mother is cared for. The debts are already paid. That was never conditional. His voice softened, just slightly. But I hope you will consider it. This arrangement would benefit us both. Marin should have refused. Every romantic bone in her body screamed that this was wrong, that marriage should be more than a transaction, that she deserved to be wanted, not merely useful. But romantic bones did not pay bills. And her mother was dying slowly in that damp little house, fading more each day without the comforts she had once known. I have conditions, Marin said. Hadrian's eyebrow rose. Name them. I want my mother settled before the wedding. I want to choose the staff who care for her. And I want your word that when the obligation feels fulfilled, when you no longer need this arrangement, you will let me go quietly. A separation, a retirement to the country, whatever can be managed discreetly. I won't hold you to this forever. Surprise registered on his features, or you're negotiating your own exit before we've even begun. I'm being practical, Your Grace. Isn't that what you wanted? A long pause, then slowly he nodded. You have my word. All 3 conditions. They shook hands like business partners sealing a contract. His grip was firm and warm, and Marin felt nothing but the cold weight of finality. She was going to marry a man who did not want her. She told herself it did not matter. She told herself she had stopped wanting things long ago. She almost believed it. Ashworth Hall rose from the mist like something from a fever dream. Marin pressed her forehead against the cold glass of the carriage window, watching the estate materialize through the gray afternoon. Towers and turrets, endless windows glinting like watchful eyes, gardens that sprawled toward the horizon in manicured perfection. The main house alone could have swallowed her childhood home 10 times over. This was her home now. The thought felt absurd. The wedding breakfast had been mercifully brief. Hadrian had disappeared almost immediately after, murmuring something about urgent correspondence, leaving Marin to navigate the congratulations and curious stares alone. His grandmother, the Dowager Duchess Octavia, had watched the proceedings with sharp eyes that missed nothing, her thin lips pressed into a line that suggested profound disapproval. Of the match? Of Marin herself? Both seemed likely. Now the carriage rolled to a stop before the grand entrance, and footmen materialized instantly, opening doors and offering hands with practiced efficiency. Marin stepped out on trembling legs, acutely aware of her travel-worn gown and the dust clinging to her hem. A woman in severe black stood at the top of the stairs. Mrs. Thornwood, the housekeeper, according to the brief introduction Hadrian had provided. Her face was impassive, but her eyes swept over Marin with the thoroughness of an inspection. "Your Grace." The words came stiffly, as if the title tasted strange. "Welcome to Ashworth Hall. I'll show you to your chambers." "Your Grace." Marin swallowed. That was her now. The interior of the house was even more overwhelming than the exterior. Marble floors stretched endlessly beneath vaulted ceilings, painted with scenes from mythology. Portraits lined the walls, generations of Voss ancestors staring down with identical gray eyes, their expressions ranging from haughty to hostile. Marin felt their judgment like a physical pressure. She did not belong here. They knew it. She knew it. The family wing is in the east section," Mrs. Thornwood explained, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. "His Grace's chambers are in the north tower. Yours are in the south tower. Connected by a private corridor, though." She paused delicately. His Grace prefers his privacy. Connected, but separate. Of course. They climbed a sweeping staircase, passed through corridor after corridor, each one grander and more intimidating than the last. By the time they reached her chambers, Marin had lost all sense of direction. "Here we are, Your Grace." The rooms were beautiful. Marin could admit that much. Pale blue wallpaper, silk curtains in cream and gold, a four-poster bed draped with velvet hangings that probably cost more than everything her family had once owned. French doors opened onto a private balcony overlooking the gardens. A writing desk, a vanity, a sitting area with chairs so delicate she was afraid to touch them. And everywhere, the silence, heavy and complete. "I've assigned Nell as your lady's maid," Mrs. Thornwood continued. "She'll attend you shortly. Dinner is at 8. His Grace dines in the formal dining room, though he often takes trays in his study when occupied with estate business." Another delicate pause. "He's been quite occupied lately." Translation: "Do not expect his company." "Thank you, Mrs. Thornwood." Marin forced a smile. "I'm sure I'll find my way." The housekeeper curtsied and departed, leaving Marin alone in her gilded cage. She stood very still for a long moment, listening to the silence. Then, slowly, she crossed to the window and looked out at the sprawling estate, the distant forests, the gray sky pressing down like a lid. And somewhere in this vast house, her husband was hiding from her. She could not even blame him. Nell arrived 20 minutes later, a young woman with auburn curls escaping her cap and warm brown eyes that crinkled when she smiled. "Your Grace. Oh, it's so lovely to finally meet you. We've all been ever so curious about His Grace's bride." She bustled about the room, opening wardrobes and laying out evening clothes with cheerful efficiency. "Mrs. Thornwood's a bit stiff, but she means well. And Cook's already planning a special menu for tomorrow. She's determined to impress you." Marin felt some of the tension ease from her shoulders. "That's very kind. All of you. Well, truth be told, we're just happy His Grace is finally married. The house has been so gloomy since—" Nell caught herself, the brightness dimming. "Forgive me, Your Grace. I talk too much." "No, please." Marin turned from the window. "Since what?" Nell's hands twisted in her apron. "Since Lord Tobias died. His Grace was never the warmest man, if you'll pardon me saying so. But after the accident, He's been like a ghost, working all hours, never seeing anyone, barely eating. The dowager's been worried sick, not that she'd ever admit it. Tobias. Even here, her brother's shadow stretched long. They were close, Marin said softly. Tobias and his Grace. Close as brothers, from what I heard. Lord Tobias used to visit every summer. The house felt alive then. Laughter and parties and guests everywhere. Nell's voice turned wistful. Haven't heard his Grace laugh since. Marin absorbed this, turning it over in her mind. She had known Hadrian and Tobias were friends. She had not realized the depth of that bond, or the devastation its severing had caused. Where is his Grace now? She asked. In his study, I expect. North Tower. He spends most of his time there. Nell hesitated. Between you and me, Your Grace, I don't think he's slept properly in months. The staff's noticed. Dark circles. Meals returned untouched. Mrs. Thornwood's been fretting something awful. A man drowning in grief, hiding in his study, surrounding himself with ledgers instead of people. Marin recognized the pattern. She had watched her own father retreat the same way after Tobias died. Withdrawal as survival, distance as defense. Thank you for telling me, Nell. She managed a genuine smile. I appreciate your honesty. Nell beamed. Anything you need, Your Grace. Anything at all. That evening, Marin dined alone. The formal dining room was cavernous, a table that could seat 30, holding a single place setting at its end. Footmen stood at attention along the walls, watching her every bite. The food was exquisite and completely tasteless in her mouth. Hadrian had sent his apologies, estate business, urgent correspondence. The excuses varied in wording, but not in meaning. He did not want to see her. After dinner, she wandered the halls, trying to learn the layout of her new prison. She found a library stuffed with leather-bound volumes, a music room with a pianoforte gathering dust, a gallery of paintings that seemed designed to intimidate rather than inspire. And then, at the end of a dimly lit corridor, she found the portrait. Tobias. Her brother smiled down at her from the canvas, captured in oils at perhaps 20 years old. Golden hair, laughing blue eyes, the careless confidence that had defined him. He wore riding clothes, a horse visible in the background, the countryside stretching behind him in pastoral perfection. Marin stood frozen, her throat closing. She had not cried at his funeral. She had not cried when they sold the house, or when her father died, or when creditors came knocking. She had been steady, sensible, the reliable one who kept everything from falling apart. But now, alone in this cold corridor, staring at the face of the brother who had been loved so easily while she had been overlooked so completely, something cracked inside her. She pressed her hand against the wall, breathing carefully. Not here. Not now. He insisted on that pose. Marin spun around, her pulse leaping. Hadrian stood at the far end of the corridor, half in shadow. She had not heard him approach. His face was guarded, but his eyes were fixed on the portrait with an expression that made the air leave her lungs. Said the horse made him look dashing. A ghost of something that might have been a smile crossed his lips. Ridiculous vanity. But that was Tobias. Yes. Marin's voice came out hoarse. It was. A hush descended between them. The portrait watched them both, frozen in eternal golden youth. You have his coloring, Hadrian said quietly, but not his temperament. No. She did not know if that was a compliment or an observation. I was always the quiet one. I know. His gaze finally moved to her face, and again she felt that strange weight of his attention. I remember. You stayed in corners at parties, read books while everyone else danced. Tobias used to say you were the sensible one. She had not known Tobias ever mentioned her at all. Sensible isn't particularly interesting, she said. No. Hadrian's eyes held hers for a moment too long. But it's valuable. perhaps more than he realized. Before she could respond, he stepped back into the shadows. "Good night, Duchess. I hope you find your chambers comfortable." Then he was gone, footsteps fading into the darkness, leaving Marin alone with her brother's painted smile and the unsettling echo of almost being seen. Almost. She returned to her beautiful empty rooms and did not sleep until dawn. 3 days passed in elegant isolation. Marin learned the rhythms of Ashworth Hall, the way a prisoner learns the patterns of their guards. Breakfast at 8 in the morning room, alone. Lunch at 1 in the small parlor, alone. And tea at 4 in her chambers, alone. Dinner at 8 in the vast dining room, alone. Hadrian existed somewhere in the house. She heard his footsteps occasionally, caught glimpses of his dark coat disappearing around corners, once passed close enough to smell cedar and sandalwood before he vanished into his study. But he never stopped, never spoke, never looked. She was a ghost, haunting her own marriage. On the 4th morning, a summons came. "The Dowager Duchess requests your presence in the morning room," Mrs. Thornwood announced, her tone suggesting this was less a request than a command. "At your earliest convenience," which meant immediately. Marin smoothed her gray morning dress, the nicest of her meager wardrobe, and followed the housekeeper through the labyrinthine corridors. Her pulse quickened. She had been dreading this moment since the wedding. The morning room was bright with winter sunlight, decorated in shades of rose and cream that somehow managed to feel cold. Dowager Duchess Octavia sat enthroned in a high-backed chair by the window, her silver hair immaculately arranged, her black morning gown making her look like a beautiful crow about to pick apart carrion. She did not rise when Marin entered. "Sit." A thin hand gestured to a chair positioned directly across from her in full sunlight. An interrogation arrangement. Marin recognized the tactic. She sat anyway, folding her hands in her lap and keeping her expression neutral. "So." The dowager's eyes, identical to her grandson's, swept over Marin with surgical precision. "The quiet sister." "Your Grace." Marin inclined her head. "Thank you for receiving me." "I didn't receive you. I summoned you. There's a difference." The dowager's lips curved, but it was not quite a smile. "Tell me, Miss Holloway. Forgive me, Your Grace. Do you know why my grandson married you?" The question was a blade wrapped in silk. "Because of his debt to my brother," Marin answered steadily. "Tobias saved his life. His Grace feels obligated to the family." "Obligated." The dowager repeated the word like it tasted bitter. "Yes, that's the excuse he's using." "Do you believe it?" Marin hesitated. "I believe his Grace is an honorable man who takes his debt seriously." "Honor," another bitter repetition. "My grandson has been drowning in honor for 6 months. Honor and guilt and grief so thick he can barely breathe. And now he's married a stranger because honor demanded it. And he thinks that will somehow absolve him." The dowager leaned forward, her gaze sharpening. "Do you know what really happened to your brother, girl?" Marin stiffened. "A riding accident. His horse. His horse." "Yes." The dowager's voice dropped. "A horse my grandson gave him. A new Arabian, spirited and barely broken. Hadrian had trained it himself, was so proud of it. He gave it to Tobias as a birthday gift 3 days before the accident." The words struck like physical blows. "Tobias was an excellent rider," Marin whispered. "He was. But that horse was not ready. Hadrian knew it. He'd planned to work with it another month before riding it himself. But Tobias saw it in the stables, fell in love instantly, begged for it. And Hadrian..." The dowager's expression flickered with something almost like grief. "Hadrian could never refuse Tobias anything. No one could. Your brother had that gift." Marin closed her eyes briefly. "Yes." Tobias had always gotten what he wanted: charm and luck and golden smiles opening every door, until the luck ran out. You're telling me His Grace blames himself? Blames himself? The Dowager laughed, a harsh sound. He's destroying himself, working 18 hours a day, eating nothing, sleeping less. He thinks if he just punishes himself enough, the guilt will finally crush him completely, and he won't have to feel it anymore. Her eyes bored into Marin's. And now he's married you. The sister. A daily reminder of everything he lost, everything he caused. Tell me, girl, do you understand what you've walked into? Marin's stomach turned. She had thought this marriage was about duty, obligation, a business arrangement between practical people. She had not understood she was being woven into someone else's hair shirt. Why are you telling me this? She asked quietly. Because I want you to know the truth, because my grandson won't tell you himself, and because I need to know what kind of woman you are. The Dowager rose, moving to stand before the fireplace, her back straight despite her years. Are you here to drain what little life he has left? To play the victim? To wallow in resentment? To add your own grievances to his mountain of guilt? No, the word came out fierce. I didn't ask for this marriage, but I don't intend to be anyone's punishment either. Then what do you intend? Marin stood, something shifting inside her, a wall crumbling. I intend to survive, Your Grace. I intend to keep my bargain. You're to be a creditable duchess, to stay out of his way if that's what he wants. And I intend to leave when this obligation is fulfilled, with the references and independence I negotiated. She met the Dowager's stare without flinching. I will not add to his guilt, but I will not be sacrificed to it either. I am not Tobias. I am not responsible for Tobias, and I refuse to spend my life apologizing for existing. The room fell still. Then the Dowager smiled, a real smile this time, thin but genuine. Good. She returned to her chair, settling back with an expression of grudging approval. You have spine. Your brother certainly didn't. All charm and no backbone, that boy. Perhaps there's something useful in you after all. Marin did not know whether to be insulted or relieved. There's a house party next week, the Dowager continued, her tone shifting to brisk business. Lord and Lady Pemberton's autumn gathering. Half of society will be there. You'll attend with Hadrian. Does he know that? He will by this evening. The Dowager's eyes glinted. My grandson has been hiding long enough. A new duchess is the perfect excuse to force him back into the world. And you. She examined Marin again, more thoughtfully this time. You will need proper gowns. I'll send for the modiste tomorrow. Your Grace, I couldn't possibly. You're the Duchess of Ashworth. You can, and you will. If my grandson insists on making unconventional choices, the least we can do is dress them appropriately. She waved a dismissive hand. That will be all. I'll send word when the modiste arrives. Marin curtsied and turned to leave, her mind spinning. One more thing. She paused at the door. But he wasn't always like this, the Dowager said softly, her voice losing its sharp edge. Before the accident, before the guilt consumed him, Hadrian was warm, generous. He laughed easily. He had friends, passions, plans for the estate. Her gaze drifted to the window, seeing something far away. I want him back. I don't care how. I just want my grandson back. Marin did not know what to say. She left without answering, carrying the weight of secrets she had never asked to learn. The modiste arrived the following morning with an army of assistants and enough fabric samples to clothe a small village. Madame Ferraud was a tiny woman with sharp eyes and sharper pins, her French accent thick enough to cut with a knife. She circled Marin like a general surveying a battlefield, clicking her tongue at the gray muslin and shaking her head at the worn boots. Non, non, non. This will not do. The Duchess of Ashworth in such rags? C'est impossible. She snapped her fingers, and bolts of silk cascaded across every surface. We begin again. From nothing. You will be magnificent." Marin stood still while measurements were taken, while colors were draped against her skin, while Madame Ferraud and her assistants debated the merits of sapphire versus emerald, with the intensity of philosophers discussing truth. "The emerald," the dowager pronounced from her chair in the corner. "It brings out the warmth in her complexion. And the cream silk for evening. Nothing too elaborate. She has good bones. Let them show." Hours passed. Marin's legs burned from standing, her arms sore from being raised and lowered countless times. But slowly, impossibly, she began to see what Madame Ferraud was creating. A duchess, an illusion perhaps, but a convincing one. "The gowns will be ready in 5 days," Madame Ferraud announced, packing away her tools with brisk efficiency. "In time for the Pemberton party. You will not disappoint, Your Grace. I do not permit disappointment." After the modiste departed, Marin retreated to the library. It had become her sanctuary over the past days. The one room where she felt almost comfortable, surrounded by books that asked nothing of her, that did not judge or evaluate or calculate her worth. She had discovered a window seat hidden behind heavy curtains, and she curled there now, with a volume of poetry, letting the words wash over her. She did not hear the door open. "You found Keats?" Marin startled so violently she nearly dropped the book. Hadrian stood in the doorway, still wearing his riding clothes, his dark hair windswept, and his cheeks flushed from cold. He looked almost human. "I'm sorry." She started to rise. "I didn't realize you needed the library. I can—" "Stay." The word came out rough, almost reluctant. He moved to a sideboard and poured himself a brandy, his movements slower than necessary. "I came for a book myself. You're not in the way." She settled back uncertainly, hyper-aware of his presence as he browsed the shelves. The fire crackled. Outside, rain began to patter against the windows. "My grandmother cornered you yesterday. It was not a question." "Yes, I apologize. She can be—" He paused, searching for the word. "Oh, relentless." "She loves you." Marin surprised herself by saying it. "She's worried about you." Hadrian's hand stilled on a leather spine. "Did she tell you that?" "She told me you've been destroying yourself, working too much, eating too little, and disappearing into guilt." Marin's voice softened. "She wants you back, the person you were before." Stillness hung between them. She watched his profile, the rigid set of his mouth, the tension in his shoulders. For a moment, she thought he would leave without responding. Then he pulled a book from the shelf and crossed to the chair across from her window seat. He sat, and somehow the distance between them shrank. "The person I was before," he repeated quietly. "That person gave a half-broken horse to his best friend and watched it kill him. That person has nothing to offer." Marin's breath hitched. Tobias made his own choices. He always did. He made them, but I enabled them. Every time. Hadrian's gaze locked with hers, and she saw the desolation there, the grinding guilt that had worn grooves into his soul. "He wanted the horse. I knew it wasn't ready. I gave it to him anyway because I couldn't stand to disappoint him. Because I never could." His laugh was hollow. "Some friend I was. You loved him. I loved him. And loving him killed him." The words hung in the air, heavy with grief. Marin set aside her poetry, leaning forward slightly. Tobias was reckless his whole life. He gambled, he drank, he charmed his way out of consequences. If it hadn't been the horse, it would have been something else. Some other adventure, some other risk he couldn't resist. She paused. "I loved him too. He was my brother. But I'm not blind to what he was." Hadrian stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. "You're not what I expected," he said slowly. "What did you expect?" Tears, accusations, another person demanding I explain why I let him die. He shook his head. "You're Steady. Steady is all I know how to be. She smiled faintly. Tobias was the flame. I was the one who cleaned up the ash. Recognition flickered in his expression. Or kinship. Your grandmother is forcing us to attend the Pemberton party, Marin said, changing the subject before the moment became too raw. She's having gowns made for me. I know. She informed me this morning. Hadrian's lips twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. She's been trying to drag me back into society for months. Apparently, a new wife was the leverage she needed. I'm sorry to be used as a weapon. Don't be. She would have found another eventually. He studied her, that unsettling intensity in his gaze. You'll do well at the party. Society will be curious, but you're more than capable of handling curiosity. You don't know that. I know you stood up to my grandmother and survived. That's more than most can claim. He rose, tucking his book under his arm. I'll see you at dinner tonight. Actually at dinner, not hiding in my study. Marin blinked. You will? Don't sound so shocked. I'm not entirely without manners. He paused at the door, looking back at her. The Keats is a good choice. Try the Wordsworth next. Third shelf, red binding. It was my father's favorite. Then he was gone, leaving Marin alone with the crackling fire and the strange warmth spreading through her. She found the Wordsworth volume exactly where he'd described. Inside the cover, in faded ink, someone had written, "For Hadrian, on your 10th birthday. May you always find peace in words." Father. She traced the inscription with her fingertip, something painful and tender blooming behind her ribs. Cracks in the armor, small ones, but cracks nonetheless. That evening, Hadrian came to dinner. He sat at the far end of the impossible table, still distant, but present. They spoke little, comments on the weather, the quality of the roast, and the dowager's plans for the Pemberton party. Small talk that meant nothing and everything. It was the first meal Marin did not eat alone. Progress, she told herself. Small and fragile, but progress. She did not let herself hope for more. The 5 days until the Pemberton party passed, in a blur of final fittings and dancing lessons. Hadrian appeared at meals now, each conversation slightly longer than the last. He recommended more books. She left volumes on his desk with notes tucked inside. The dowager watched these small exchanges with sharp, assessing eyes, but offered no comment beyond an occasional approving nod that suggested cautious optimism. When the night finally arrived, Marin stood before her mirror in the emerald silk gown, scarcely recognizing herself. The Pemberton estate blazed with light. Carriages lined the drive, disgorging lords and ladies in silks and satins, jewels glittering in the torchlight. Music drifted from open windows, and the hum of conversation rose like a living thing, hungry and curious and waiting to devour. Marin smoothed her gloved hands over the emerald silk, trying to calm the flutter in her chest. Madame Ferraud had outdone herself. The dress fit perfectly, emphasizing curves Marin had not known she possessed, the color bringing out the green flecks in her hazel eyes. Her dark hair was arranged in an elegant, upswept style, small diamonds borrowed from the Ashworth collection glinting among the pins. She looked like a duchess. She felt like an imposter. Ready? Hadrian stood beside her at the carriage door, his face composed but not cold. He wore formal evening wear with the ease of a man born to it, his dark hair carefully styled, his gray eyes reflecting the torchlight. No, Marin admitted, but I don't suppose that matters. Something flickered across his face. Amusement, perhaps, or respect. He offered his arm. Then we'll be unready together. Come. They entered Lord Pemberton's grand hall side by side, and the whispers began immediately. Marin felt them like insects crawling across her skin, every eye turning, every fan raised to conceal moving lips, every head bent toward a neighbor's ear. the Duke of Ashworth finally emerged from his morning seclusion, and with such a peculiar choice of bride. "Smile," Hadrian murmured, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "You look like you're approaching an execution." "Aren't I?" "Only socially. The physical kind is reserved for high treason." His hand covered hers where it rested on his arm, the touch brief but steadying. "You're the Duchess of Ashworth. They can whisper all they like. They cannot touch you." Easy for him to say. He had been born to this. She had been born to careful economy and social invisibility. But she lifted her chin and forced her lips into a pleasant curve, and together they descended into the wolves' den. The first hour was a blur of introductions. Lord and Lady Pemberton welcomed them with effusive warmth that seemed mostly genuine. Lesser nobles approached in carefully orchestrated waves, each angling for a moment of the Duke's attention, each examining Marin with barely concealed curiosity. She performed her role adequately, she thought. Curtsying at the right moments, murmuring pleasantries, deflecting questions about her family, with vague references to modest circumstances in the north. No one pressed too hard. The title protected her, just as Hadrian had promised. But the protection had limits. She sensed the woman's approach before seeing her, a ripple in the crowd, a subtle shift in attention, and the way conversations dimmed and heads turned toward the ballroom entrance. Lady Venetia Blackwood moved through the gathering like a gilded serpent, her golden hair piled high and studded with sapphires, her ice-blue gown cut to display a figure that men wrote poetry about. She was beautiful in the way that dangerous things were beautiful, all sharp edges concealed beneath a polished surface, and her eyes were fixed directly on Hadrian. "Your Grace." Her voice was honey and venom, perfectly blended. "What a surprise to see you among the living. We'd all begun to think you'd bricked yourself into that tomb of an estate permanently." Hadrian's arm tensed beneath Marin's hand, but his expression remained neutral. "Lady Venetia, you look well." "I always look well, darling. It's a burden, but I manage." Her gaze slid to Marin with the lazy assessment of a cat examining a mouse. "And this must be your wife. How quaint." The emphasis on the word wife suggested several less flattering alternatives. "Marin, may I present Lady Venetia Blackwood, an old acquaintance." Hadrian's tone was carefully flat. "Lady Venetia, the Duchess of Ashworth." "Duchess." Venetia did not curtsy. The omission was deliberate, a subtle insult cloaked in social ambiguity. "I don't believe we've met, but then, I don't travel in provincial circles." "No, I imagine you don't." Marin kept her voice pleasant. "Provincial circles tend to lack the sophistication of London society." Venetia's eyes narrowed slightly, detecting the edge beneath the politeness. "Indeed. Though it seems you've managed to climb rather dramatically out of those circles. How fortunate for you." Fortune had little to do with it, but thank you for your concern. A crackling tension filled the air between them. Hadrian cleared his throat. "If you'll excuse us, Lady Venetia, I promised my wife a dance." "Of course." Venetia's smile was razor-thin. "Do enjoy yourselves. I'll be watching." She glided away, and Marin released a breath she had not realized she was holding. "Old acquaintance," she murmured, as Hadrian led her toward the dance floor. "My grandmother's preferred candidate for Duchess, before you." His face hardened. Venetia was persistent. She believed a union was inevitable. "And you disagreed?" "Venetia Blackwood would make an excellent Duchess. She would also make me wish for an early grave within 6 months." He turned to face her, one hand finding her waist, the other clasping her gloved fingers. "I chose poorly by society's standards. But I chose." The music began, a waltz, slow and sweeping. Marin placed her hand on his shoulder and let him lead her into the dance. She had practiced with Nell over the past days, awkward sessions in her chambers that left them both laughing. But this was different. This was Hadrian's hand, warm at her waist, his gray eyes holding hers, his body moving with hers in perfect synchronicity. "You're counting again," he observed. "I'm trying not to step on you." "Stop trying. Just feel the music." She almost laughed at the irony, the same advice from the most controlled man she had ever met. But she tried anyway, letting the melody guide her, trusting his lead. The counting faded. The room faded. There was only the music and the movement, and the man holding her, guiding her, watching her with an intensity that made her lungs seize. "Everyone is staring," she whispered. "Let them." His hand pressed slightly more firmly at her waist. "You're doing beautifully. I'm doing adequately at best. You stood up to Venetia Blackwood without flinching. That's more than beautiful. That's magnificent." Marin's cheeks flushed. "She's not as frightening as your grandmother. She's considerably more vindictive." His lips curved. An actual smile. Small, but real. "You should be careful around her. Venetia doesn't forgive slights, and you've just committed several." "By existing?" "By wearing the title she wanted." His thumb moved in a small circle against her waist, almost certainly unconscious. "And by dancing with the man she intended to possess." The word sent a strange thrill through her. Possess. As if Hadrian were something to be owned, rather than something to be earned. "She can have you," Marin said quietly. "When this arrangement ends, you'll be free to marry anyone you choose." The smile faded. His step slowed slightly. "You're remarkably eager to plan your own departure." "I'm being practical. Isn't that what you wanted?" "I wanted." He stopped, something flickering behind his eyes. "I don't know what I wanted. That seems to be a recurring theme lately." The waltz built toward its crescendo. Around them, other couples swirled and spun, but Marin was aware only of Hadrian, the warmth of his hand, the scent of cedar and sandalwood, and the way he looked at her, like he was trying to solve a puzzle he had not expected to find. "You're different," he murmured, "from everyone else." "Different how?" "You don't want anything from me." "I negotiated 3 conditions. You negotiated an exit, independence, the right to leave." His gaze held hers, something raw bleeding through the careful control. "Everyone else in my life wants something from me. The title, the wealth, the connections. You just want to survive me." Marin's throat closed. It's not an accusation, He seemed to search for the word. "Refreshing. And unsettling. I haven't decided which." The music swelled, then softened into its final notes. They slowed to a stop, still holding each other, still caught in that strange, suspended moment. "Hadrian," she whispered, and watched his eyes darken at the sound of his name. "We should talk." His voice was rough. "Properly. Not here, not surrounded by vultures, but soon." "What about?" He opened his mouth to answer. "There you are." The dowager's voice cut through the moment like a blade. She swept toward them, towing a distinguished older couple in her wake, her smile too sharp to be entirely friendly. "Lord and Lady Ashcroft have been dying to meet your bride, Hadrian. You simply must introduce them." The spell shattered. Hadrian released her, stepping back with the smooth courtesy that had become his armor. "Of course." He offered Marin his arm again, his expression neutral once more. "Duchess, shall we?" She took his arm, her pulse still racing, her mind replaying his words. "We should talk." But about what? And more importantly, why did the thought thrill her as much as it unsettled her? The rest of the evening passed in a fog. Marin smiled and curtsied and made appropriate conversation, but her mind was elsewhere. In a waltz, in gray eyes that had looked at her like she mattered, in a voice saying you're different like it was the most important discovery in the world. She was in trouble. She had promised herself she would not hope, would not expect, would not let this temporary arrangement become something that could hurt her. But as she watched Hadrian navigate the crowded ballroom, exchanging pleasantries with people who meant nothing to him, she felt the first treacherous tendrils of something she had sworn to avoid. She was beginning to care, and caring, she knew, would destroy her. The carriage ride home was silent. Maren stared out the window at the darkened countryside, acutely aware of Hadrian's presence across from her. The dowager had remained at the Pemberton estate, claiming fatigue, but clearly plotting something with Lady Pemberton. They were alone for the first time since the waltz. Neither spoke. "We should talk," he had said. But the words hung between them, unacknowledged, growing heavier with each passing mile. When they finally arrived at Ashworth Hall, Hadrian handed her down from the carriage with impeccable courtesy. "Good night, Duchess." His voice was formal again, the walls rebuilt. "You acquitted yourself admirably this evening." "Thank you." She wanted to ask what he had meant, what they needed to discuss, why he had looked at her like that during the waltz. But his expression had closed, and the moment had passed. She watched him disappear into the house, and something hollow settled in her chest. The following days brought a subtle shift in their routine. Hadrian still worked long hours in his study, but he appeared at meals now. Brief conversations became less stilted. He recommended books from the library, and she found herself leaving volumes on his desk in return, small notes tucked inside with her thoughts on the passages. It was nothing. It was everything. The dowager watched them with sharp, assessing eyes, but said nothing. And then, on the 5th day after the Pemberton party, Lady Venetia Blackwood came to call. Maren was in the morning room when the footman announced the visitor. She had barely processed the name before Venetia swept through the door, radiant in pale blue muslin, her smile bright and brittle as spun glass. "Duchess, how delightful to find you at home. I simply had to pay my respects properly after our brief encounter at the party." She settled into a chair, without waiting for invitation, arranging her skirts with practiced elegance. "I do hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all." Maren set aside her correspondence, keeping her expression neutral. "How kind of you to visit." "Kindness has nothing to do with it, I'm afraid." Venetia's smile sharpened. "Curiosity, perhaps? I find myself utterly fascinated by you, Duchess. The mysterious bride, who appeared from nowhere to claim the most eligible bachelor in England." "I claimed nothing," His Grace proposed. "I accepted." "Yes. How romantic." The word dripped with mockery. A proposal born of guilt and obligation, every girl's dream. Maren's fingers curled in her lap, but she kept her voice steady. "You seem remarkably well informed about private matters, Lady Venetia." "I make it my business to be informed." Venetia leaned forward, her eyes glittering. "Did you know that Hadrian and I had an understanding? Before your brother's unfortunate accident, before you became a convenient charity case, we were going to announce our engagement at the Pemberton party this year." The words landed like stones in still water. "His Grace has never mentioned an understanding." "No, I don't suppose he would." Venetia's laugh was musical and cruel. "He's too honorable to speak ill of a lady, but everyone knew. Everyone expected it. The Blackwood fortune joined to the Ashworth title, a perfect match by every measure." She paused, letting the tension build. "And then Tobias died, and guilt made Hadrian foolish, and suddenly there you were. The grieving sister, the sympathetic cause, the albatross around his neck." Maren's face burned, but she refused to look away. "If I'm an albatross, that's between my husband and me." "Husband." Venetia repeated the word like it was a joke. "He married you out of duty, Duchess. He looks at you and sees his dead friend. Do you really imagine that will ever become something more?" She rose, smoothing her gloves with deliberate care. "I've known Hadrian since we were children. I know what he wants, what he needs, what he's capable of feeling. And I promise you, whatever tender moments you think you've shared, whatever hopeful little fantasies you've been nurturing, they will amount to nothing. Why are you telling me this? Maren stood, her voice low but firm. What do you want? I want you to see the truth. Venetia's mask slipped, revealing something cold and hungry beneath. You don't belong in his world. You're a placeholder, a temporary solution to a permanent problem. And when Hadrian finally realizes the mistake he's made, when the novelty of his guilt-driven charity wears thin, he'll come back to where he belongs. She moved toward the door, then paused, glancing back over her shoulder. Enjoy your borrowed life while it lasts, Duchess. It won't last long. The door closed behind her with a soft click. Maren stood frozen, her pulse racing, her throat tight with fury and something worse. Fear. Because Venetia was right, about the guilt, about the obligation, about all of it. She was a charity case, a burden he had chosen to bear out of misplaced honor, and no amount of library conversations or meaningful glances could change that fundamental truth, since she had been a fool to hope. That evening, Maren did not come down for dinner. She pleaded a headache, sending Nell with apologies. Then she sat in her beautiful room and stared at the fire, replaying Venetia's words until they carved grooves into her mind. He looks at you and sees his dead friend, a temporary solution to a permanent problem. Enjoy your borrowed life while it lasts. A knock at the door made her start. Come in. She expected Nell with tea. Instead, Hadrian stood in the doorway, concern creasing his brow. The headache, is it serious? No. She looked away, unable to meet his eyes. Just tiredness. I'll be fine by morning. He did not leave. Instead, he stepped inside, closing the door behind him. Venetia visited today. It was not a question. Maren stiffened. How did you know? Mrs. Thornwood mentioned it. He moved closer, studying her face with that unsettling intensity. What did she say to you? Nothing of consequence. You're a terrible liar. His voice gentled. Maren. What did she say? The sound of her name in his mouth, not Duchess, not Miss Holloway, but Maren, cracked something inside her. The truth, she whispered. She said you married me out of guilt, that I'm a reminder of everything you lost, that I don't belong here and never will. Her words broke. She said when the novelty wears off, you'll go back to her. A hush fell between them, heavy and charged. Then Hadrian laughed. It was not a kind laugh. It was dark and bitter and edged with fury. Venetia Blackwood is a viper who has been trying to sink her fangs into my title since we were 17 years old. He crossed to the window, his hands clenching at his sides. She doesn't want me. She wants what I represent. Power, prestige, the Ashworth name. She would have made my life a carefully decorated misery, and she knows I know it. Then why did everyone expect? Because my grandmother approved, because society approved, because I was too tired to fight, and Venetia was persistent enough to create the illusion of inevitability. He turned to face her, his gray eyes burning. I never made her any promises. I never gave her any reason to believe we had an understanding beyond what she invented in her own mind. Maren's pulse quickened. But she said, she lies. It's what she does best. He stepped closer, his voice dropping. You want to know why I married you instead of her? Because when I look at you, I don't see Tobias. I see you, the woman who reads poetry in hidden window seats, who stands up to my grandmother without flinching, who negotiated her own exit before we'd even begun because she expected nothing from me except the freedom to eventually leave. Hadrian, you're not a charity case. His hands found her shoulders, his grip soft but steady. You're not a burden. You're the first person in 6 months who has looked at me like I'm a man instead of a title or a problem to be solved. His voice wavered. And if Venetia has made you doubt that, then I have failed you in ways I didn't know I could fail. Maren stared up at him, the air trapped in her lungs. Why does it matter, she whispered, what I think of you? Why does it matter so much? He was silent for a long moment, his thumbs tracing small circles on her shoulders. I don't know, he admitted finally. But it does. More than I can explain. More than I expected. His gaze held hers, raw and uncertain. I'm not good at this, at feeling things, but you make me want to try. The words hung between them like a held breath. Then he released her and stepped back, the vulnerability shuddering behind his usual control. Rest. You look exhausted. He moved toward the door, then paused. And Maren? Don't let Venetia's poison take root. She's wrong about everything, especially about how long you're going to last. He left before she could respond. Maren sank onto her bed, trembling. You make me want to try. She was in far deeper trouble than she had realized. The next week passed in a strange, suspended state. Hadrian's confession, if it could be called that, had transformed something between them. He sought her company now. Not overtly, not dramatically, but consistently. He appeared in the library when she was reading. He lingered after meals to discuss poetry, or estate management, or nothing at all. He walked with her in the gardens, pointing out his mother's roses, his father's folly. The treehouse Tobias had helped him build when they were 12. He was letting her in. And Maren, despite every warning her practical mind screamed, was letting him. The turning point came on a rain-soaked afternoon. They were in the library again, a fire crackling against the autumn chill, rain hammering the windows. Maren had claimed her usual window seat. Hadrian sat in the chair across from her, a ledger open on his lap that he had not looked at in 20 minutes. You're staring, she said, without looking up from her book. I'm observing. Is there a difference? Staring is rude. Observing is. He paused. Appreciative. Her cheeks warmed. What exactly are you appreciating? The way you bite your lip when you reach a good passage. The way the firelight catches your hair. The way you've somehow made that window seat look like a throne. Maren finally raised her eyes, pulse racing. He was watching her with that intensity she had come to recognize. The weight of his attention focused entirely on her, as if nothing else in the world existed. You shouldn't say things like that. Why not? Because we have an arrangement, rules. You agreed to let me go when this was over. I know what I agreed to. He set aside the ledger, rising to cross the room. He stopped before her window seat, close enough to touch. And I'm beginning to regret every word of it. Maren's breath hitched. Hadrian, I don't want you to leave. The words came out rough, almost torn from him. I know that wasn't the agreement. I know I promised. But every day you're here, every conversation we share, every time you look at me like I'm worth seeing. He broke off, his expression strained. I don't want you to leave. You barely know me. I know that you're brave and stubborn, and far too willing to sacrifice yourself for others. I know you hide in corners because you've spent your whole life being overlooked. I know you expected nothing from this marriage except escape, and somehow, that makes me want to give you everything. His hand rose, hovering near her cheek without quite touching. Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me this is only obligation. Tell me you feel nothing. And I'll walk away. I'll honor our agreement to the letter. Maren's blood rushed in her ears. I can't tell you that. Then tell me what you can. She set aside her book with trembling hands, rose from the window seat until they stood inches apart. This close, she could see the flecks of darker gray in his eyes, the slight unsteadiness of his breathing, the tension in every line of his body. I'm scared, she whispered, because I promised myself I wouldn't hope, wouldn't expect. Wouldn't let this become something that could hurt me. Her voice wavered. But you make it impossible. You make me want things I have no right to want. What things? This. She gestured helplessly between them. You. A future that isn't just survival. Someone who sees me instead of looking through me. Moisture gathered in her eyes. I've spent my whole life being invisible, Hadrian. And when you look at me, I feel seen. And that's the most frightening thing in the world. His hand finally found her cheek, cupping her face with devastating gentleness. You're not invisible, he said softly. You never were. The world was simply too blind to notice. His thumb traced her cheekbone. I notice. Every day. Every hour. It's becoming a problem, actually. I can't think of anything else. Despite everything, a choked laugh escaped her. That sounds inconvenient. Extremely. His lips curved. I missed a crucial paragraph in a land agreement yesterday because I was remembering the way you smiled at dinner. The Duke of Ashworth, undone by a smile. By far more than that. His expression grew serious. Maren, I need to tell you something. Something I should have said weeks ago. What? I didn't marry you just for Tobias. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I told myself I did. I told myself it was guilt, obligation, and honor. But the truth is, he paused, gathering himself. I remembered you, from before. You came to a house party at Pemberton's 3 years ago. Tobias brought you. You spent the whole weekend reading in corners, while everyone else danced and flirted and competed for attention. And I couldn't stop watching you. Maren stared. You wouldn't remember. We never spoke. I was engaged in the endless performance of being the Duke, and you were. His smile turned wistful. You were the only real person in the room, the only one who wasn't performing. And I thought, who is that woman? Why doesn't anyone see her? You remembered that? I remembered everything. His brow came to rest against hers. When Tobias died, when I was drowning in guilt, I told myself marrying his sister was penance. But the truth is, I was looking for an excuse. Any excuse to bring you into my life. His voice roughened. I'm sorry. That's selfish. That's not. She kissed him. It wasn't a practiced kiss. Not elegant or sophisticated. It was desperate and clumsy and absolutely necessary. Her hands fisting in his lapels, his arms wrapping around her like he was afraid she would disappear. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his eyes were dark with something that made her pulse race. Tell me to stop, he murmured. Tell me this is a mistake, and I'll... Don't stop. Her voice shook. Please don't stop. He kissed her again, on slower this time, more thorough. His hand slid into her hair, scattering pins, tangling in the dark strands. She clung to him like a drowning woman finding shore. The rain hammered the windows. The fire crackled. And in the quiet library of Ashworth Hall, two people who had expected nothing from each other found something neither had dared to hope for. Everything. The next morning, everything fell apart. Maren woke to Nell's urgent knocking, her maid's face pale with alarm. Your Grace, you must come quickly. There's a situation. In the Great Hall. Maren dressed hurriedly and rushed downstairs, her blood running cold with formless dread. She found chaos. A woman stood in the center of the Great Hall, travel-worn and weeping, clutching a small child to her chest. Servants hovered uncertainly at the edges of the room, and Hadrian stood frozen before the woman, his face drained of all color. Didn't know what else to do. The woman's voice was raw with exhaustion. He never answered my letters. I had nowhere else to go. I thought surely he would help. What is happening here? Everyone turned at Maren's voice. The woman's tear-streaked face swiveled toward her, then back to Hadrian, confusion and desperation warring in her expression. Who is this? The woman asked. My wife. Hadrian's voice was hollow. Marin, this is Cordelia Holloway, Tobias's widow. The world tilted sideways. Tobias was married. Marin's voice came from very far away. No one knew. Cordelia's chin lifted, a flash of pride cutting through the tears. He wanted to wait until he'd secured his fortune. He was going to tell everyone after his birthday. But then the accident, and I was left with nothing. And this child. She shifted the bundle in her arms, revealing a small face, perhaps a year old, with golden curls and achingly familiar blue eyes. This is Tobias's son, your nephew, and I have no one. Nothing. I've been living on charity for months, and I cannot. She broke down, sobbing. Marin stared at the child, at Tobias's child, the nephew she had never known existed. I'll arrange rooms, Hadrian said quietly. Food, clothing, whatever you need. We'll discuss the details when you've rested. He guided Cordelia away with efficient compassion, murmuring instructions to servants, organizing the chaos with the practiced ease of a man who had managed crises before. Marin stood alone in the great hall, her mind spinning. Tobias had been married. Secretly, recklessly, without telling anyone. He had left behind a wife and child, and Hadrian had paid his debts without ever knowing. Had married Marin without ever knowing. Had kissed her last night without knowing that their entire arrangement was built on incomplete truth. The dowager arrived within the hour, summoned by frantic servant messages. The scene that followed was brutal. A secret marriage. Octavia's voice could have frozen fire. A secret child. And you expect us to simply accept this woman's claims on her word alone? She has documents. Hadrian's tone was carefully controlled. Marriage certificate, the boy's birth record. I've had my solicitor examine them. They're genuine or well forged. So Tobias Holloway was a charming fool who attracted scheming women like honey attracts flies. Grandmother, this changes everything. The dowager rounded on Marin, her eyes blazing. You told us your family had no other obligations. You told us the debts were the extent of it. I didn't know. Marin's voice was barely above a whisper. Tobias never told me. Never told anyone. Convenient. Grandmother. Enough. Hadrian stepped between them. Marin knew nothing about this. Neither did I. We'll sort through the implications together. The implications? Octavia laughed bitterly. Your wife's brother secretly married some common actress. She's not common, Marin interjected, something sparking through her numbness. She's afraid and alone, and she came here because she had nowhere else to go. Whatever else Tobias did, that child is innocent. That child is a complication. The dowager's voice cut like a blade. A potential claim on the Holloway name, such as it is. A scandal waiting to explode. Do you understand what society will say when they learn the Duke of Ashworth's new family includes his wife's secretly born nephew? He's not a bastard. They were married. In secret. Without witnesses of consequence. Without family approval. Octavia's lips thinned. It will be treated as scandal, regardless of the legal reality. And it will reflect on all of us. On Hadrian. On you. On this family's reputation. The words landed like blows. Marin looked at Hadrian, searching for reassurance, for the warmth they had shared last night. But his face was shuttered, his expression masked. Hadrian? Her voice faltered. I need time. He would not meet her eyes. I need to think. He turned and walked away, leaving her alone with his grandmother and the ruins of everything she had begun to hope for. That night, Marin made her decision. She had brought chaos into this household, her brother's secrets, her brother's debts, her brother's hidden family. All of it was her legacy, her responsibility, her burden to bear. Hadrian had married her out of guilt. Perhaps he had convinced himself he felt more. Perhaps last night had been real. But now? Now he was faced with the true cost of binding himself to the Holloway wreckage. And the look in his eyes when he walked away, that closed, distant expression, told her everything she needed to know. She would not be an albatross around his neck. She would not watch his warmth curdle into resentment. She would leave. Quietly before dawn. Take Cordelia and the child with her. Find somewhere they could survive together, start over, and build something that didn't depend on Hadrian's charity or the Tun's approval. It was the right thing to do. The practical thing. She packed her modest belongings, the original few items she had brought, not the beautiful gowns the Ashworth fortune had provided. She wrote a letter explaining her decision, thanking Hadrian for his kindness, releasing him from every obligation. She did not mention the kiss. Some things were too painful to commit to paper. At 4 a.m, she crept down the servants' staircase, her small valise in hand, and found Hadrian waiting at the bottom. "Going somewhere." Her pulse stopped. "How did you?" "Nell. She came to me an hour ago. I'm worried you were planning something foolish." His voice was dangerously calm. She was right. This isn't foolish. This is practical. Marin gripped her valise tighter. "I'm a liability to you, Hadrian. My brother's secrets, my family's scandals, they'll drag you down. You didn't bargain for any of this." "No, I bargained for you." "That's not. You promised me." His control cracked, something raw bleeding through. "You promised you wouldn't add to my guilt, that you wouldn't sacrifice yourself to it. And now you're trying to sneak away in the middle of the night like a thief, leaving me nothing but a letter full of noble self-destruction. I'm trying to protect you. I don't need protection." He crossed the distance between them, his hands gripping her shoulders. "I need you, here, with me, facing whatever comes together instead of running from it alone." "Hadrian." "No." His voice turned fierce. "I've lost enough. I've watched enough people I care about disappear because I was too cowardly to hold on. I will not lose you, too." "People I care about." The words echoed through her, stealing her breath. "You're not letting me leave." It was not quite a question. "I'm begging you not to." His head bowed to meet hers, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Stay. Please. We'll figure out Cordelia, the child, my grandmother, all of it. But I cannot do any of it without you." His grip tightened. "I refuse to do any of it without you." Marin closed her eyes, tears escaping down her cheeks. "I'm scared." "So am I." His thumbs traced her tears. But I would rather be frightened with you than safe without you." The valise slipped from her fingers. "You impossible man," she whispered. "Is that a yes?" She kissed him instead of answering. It was all the answer he needed. Dawn found them in the library, hands intertwined, and planning war. "My grandmother will fight this," Hadrian said quietly. "She'll see Cordelia as a threat, the child as a scandal to be managed. We need to present a united front before she can act." What kind of action would she take? Legally? There's little she can do. The marriage documents are genuine. The child is legitimate. But socially? His mouth set into a hard line. She has the power to make Cordelia's life miserable, to spread whispers, close doors, and ensure that woman is never accepted anywhere. Then we need to accept her first. Marin straightened, her mind clicking into the practical mode that had carried her through years of managing Tobias's disasters. Publicly, formally, make it clear that the Ashworth family embraces Tobias's widow and child without reservation. That will create scandal regardless. Yes, but we control the narrative. Secret shame or open embrace. Society will judge either way. At least this way, we choose how we're judged. Hadrian studied her with something like admiration. You've thought about this. I've spent my whole life cleaning up after Tobias. This is simply the largest mess yet. She squeezed his hand. "We can do this, if we stand together." The Dowager arrived for breakfast, armed for combat. "Mom, I've spoken with my solicitor," she announced, before the tea was even poured. "There are options. The woman could be settled somewhere quiet, given a modest income, kept out of sight until—" "No." Octavia's eyes snapped to Hadrian. "Excuse me. Cordelia is my wife's family. That makes her my family. She will be acknowledged publicly as Tobias Holloway's widow, and given a place in this household for as long as she wishes it." "You cannot be serious. Completely serious." Hadrian's voice was iron. "I've made my decision, grandmother, and so has my wife." The Dowager turned her gaze to Marin, sharp and assessing. "You support this madness?" "I support doing what's right." Marin met the older woman's stare without flinching. "Tobias made mistakes, many of them. But that child is innocent, and Cordelia loved my brother enough to marry him in secret, to bear his child alone, to come here in desperation when she had nowhere else to turn. That deserves compassion, not condemnation. Compassion doesn't protect this family's reputation. Reputation isn't worth protecting if it requires cruelty." A weighted quiet filled the room. Then, slowly, something changed in the Dowager's expression. The combative edge softened, replaced by something almost like respect. "You remind me of Hadrian's mother," she said quietly. "She said something similar to me once, years ago. I disagreed with her then, too." A pause. "I was wrong." Marin blinked. "Don't make me repeat it." Octavia's voice regained its crispness. "If we're going to do this insane thing, we're going to do it properly. Aunt Cordelia needs better clothes. Those rags she arrived in are an embarrassment. The child needs a proper nursemaid, and we'll need to plan the introduction carefully. The Hartford ball is in 2 weeks. That would be appropriate timing." Hadrian's eyebrows rose. "You're helping." "I'm mitigating disaster. There's a difference." But her eyes held something warm as they moved between her grandson and his wife. "Don't mistake this for approval, but perhaps I underestimated what the two of you might accomplish together." It was not quite a blessing. It was close enough. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind. Cordelia, once recovered from her exhaustion, proved to be warm and genuine, and nothing like the schemer the Dowager had feared. She had been an actress before meeting Tobias, not a grand star, but a working player in provincial theaters. She was intelligent, practical, and utterly devoted to her son, whom she had named Marcus after her father. "Tobias was going to tell everyone," she confided to Marin one afternoon, bouncing Marcus on her knee. "He had such grand plans. We were going to have a proper wedding party, introduce Marcus to the family, and start fresh." Her eyes glistened. "He never got the chance." "He was always full of plans," Marin said softly. "Following through was harder for him." "He followed through on us." Cordelia's chin lifted. "Whatever else he was, he loved us. He wanted to be better. For Marcus." Marin reached over and squeezed her hand. "Then we'll make sure Marcus knows that." "Always." Lady Venetia Blackwood's reaction to the news was predictable. She appeared at Ashworth Hall 3 days before the Hartford ball, uninvited, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "I've heard the most extraordinary rumors." She settled into the morning room like she owned it. "A secret wife? A hidden child? Oh, this is delicious. Is there something you need, Lady Venetia?" Marin kept her voice cool. "We're rather busy preparing for the ball." "I'm sure you are, trying to polish this catastrophe into something presentable." Venetia's eyes glittered. "I wanted to offer my condolences. It must be so difficult, watching your brother's scandals destroy your husband's reputation. The only thing being destroyed is your illusion of relevance." Marin set aside her embroidery, facing Venetia directly. "My husband's reputation is intact, his family is united, and his grandmother, your supposed ally, has embraced Cordelia entirely. Venetia's smile flickered. For now, perhaps. But society has a long memory. Society will follow the lead of the Ashworth family, as it always has. Marin rose, moving to the door. Thank you for your concern, Lady Venetia. I trust you can find your own way out. She held the door open, waiting. For a long moment, Venetia did not move. Her mask cracked slightly, revealing the fury beneath. You think you've won, she hissed. You think this little happy family performance will last. But I know Hadrian. I know what he needs. And sooner or later, he'll realize that you're nothing but a mistake he made while drowning in guilt. Goodbye, Lady Venetia. Venetia swept past her, pausing just long enough to whisper, This isn't over. Then she was gone, and Marin closed the door on her with a satisfying click. The night before the Hartford ball, Hadrian found Marin in the garden. She stood among his mother's roses, her face tilted toward the stars, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the autumn chill. She looked ethereal in the moonlight, beautiful in a way that made his chest constrict. Nervous? He asked, coming to stand beside her. Very. She smiled faintly. Tomorrow, we face all of society with Cordelia on our arm, and a scandal barely contained. There are 100 ways it could go wrong. There are also ways it could go right. Ever the optimist. Newly converted. He took her hand, weaving his fingers through hers. You did that, you know. Made me believe things could be right again. She turned to face him, her eyes luminous in the starlight. Hadrian, I need to tell you something. Before tomorrow. Before everything becomes official and public and permanent. What is it? I love you. The words fell between them like stars. I know I wasn't supposed to, she continued, her voice shaking slightly. I know this was meant to be an arrangement, an obligation, a temporary solution. But somewhere between the library conversations and the walks in the garden and the way you looked at me like I was worth seeing, she broke off, her eyes burning with unshed tears. I fell in love with you, and I needed you to know. Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever society decides about us, I needed you to know that this is real for me. You are real for me. Hadrian stared at her, his heart so full it threatened to crack his ribs. Marin, her name was a prayer, I've been in love with you since you read Byron in my window seat, and told me you wanted to not be afraid anymore. He cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing away tears that had finally escaped. I've been in love with you since you stood up to my grandmother, since you defended Cordelia, since you packed your bags in the middle of the night, and I realized I would burn down the world before I let you walk away. Hadrian, I love you. The words felt like freedom, not out of guilt, not out of obligation. I love you because you are the bravest, most stubborn, most quietly extraordinary person I have ever known. And I don't want a temporary arrangement. I don't want an exit clause, or a separation, or a convenient ending. His brow touched hers. I want forever. I want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life. I want to argue about poetry and manage scandals and build something real together. That sounds terrifying, she whispered. It does. His lips curved. Want to be frightened together? She answered by kissing him. It was a kiss that sealed promises that burned away the last of their walls, that declared in no uncertain terms, I choose you. I will always choose you. When they finally broke apart, breathless and laughing, the stars seemed to shine brighter. Tomorrow, Marin said, we face the wolves. Together. Together. She squeezed his hand. I quite liked the sound of that. The Hartford Ball was the event of the season. The cream of London society had gathered, drawn by the promise of drama, scandal, and the first public appearance of the Duke of Ashworth's mysterious new family. By the time Hadrian's carriage rolled up the torchlit drive, rumors were already swirling thick enough to choke on. Marin emerged first, dressed in sapphire silk that caught the light like liquid midnight. The Ashworth diamonds sparkled at her throat. She looked every inch a duchess. Behind her came Hadrian, distinguished in formal black, his hand reaching back to help the next figure descend. Cordelia Holloway, Tobias's widow, stepped into the light. She wore dove gray, technically still in mourning, but elegant, refined, inarguably appropriate. On her arm, the Dowager Duchess herself, radiating glacial approval. The crowd fell silent. Then Hadrian offered his arm to Marin, his voice carrying clearly across the hushed assembly. "Shall we? A duchess." "With pleasure, Your Grace." Together, the four of them ascended the grand staircase and entered the ball. The next hour was a masterclass in social warfare. Every matron who approached received gracious introductions. Every cutting question was deflected with practiced ease. The Dowager held court in one corner, daring anyone to criticize her grandson's choices. Cordelia charmed skeptics with her warmth and genuine grief for Tobias. And Hadrian and Marin moved through the crowd like a united front, their alliance visible in every glance, every touch, and every shared smile. Lady Venetia watched from across the room, her face a mask of contained fury. But she did not approach, did not strike. There was nothing to strike at. The turning point came during the supper waltz. Hadrian led Marin onto the floor, pulling her close with a familiarity that set tongues wagging and fans fluttering. "They're staring," she murmured. "Let them." His eyes held hers, warm with something that made her pulse race. "They can see what I see, the most remarkable woman in England, in my arms, exactly where she belongs." Flatterer? Realist. He spun her gracefully. "I have an announcement to make tonight, after this dance." "What kind of announcement?" His smile turned mysterious. "You'll see." The waltz ended. The music faded. And before Marin could question him further, Hadrian stepped forward, raising one hand for attention. The room fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice carried with commanding ease, "I thank you for your attendance tonight, and for your interest in my family's recent developments." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter. "I stand before you, with my wife, my grandmother, and my late friend's widow, united in purpose and affection. But I have one more announcement to make." He turned to Marin, taking her hands in his. "When I married this woman 2 months ago, I told myself it was duty, obligation, a debt I owed to her brother's memory." His voice softened, loud enough for the crowd, but intimate somehow. "I was wrong. It was not duty that drew me to her. It was recognition of a kindred spirit, of someone who had spent her life being overlooked and deserved to be seen." Marin's eyes filled with tears. "I see you," he continued, his voice roughening. "I will always see you. And I want everyone in this room to know that my marriage to Marin Holloway is not a charity, not an obligation, not a penance for past failures." He raised her hand to his lips, like it is the greatest choice I have ever made, and I intend to spend the rest of my life proving worthy of it. The room erupted in applause. Not universal approval. Marin could see the skeptics, the critics, the Venetias of the world with their sour expressions and bitter whispers. But overwhelming, genuine, thunderous applause from people who recognized love when they saw it. And in that moment, surrounded by strangers who were finally seeing her, held by a man who had chosen her above all others, Marin felt something she had never expected to feel. Home. 1 year later. The Ashworth nursery was full of laughter. Marcus, now a sturdy toddler, chased a ball across the carpet, while Cordelia watched with fond exasperation. In the corner, the Dowager sat with a cup of tea, pretending not to smile every time the boy looked her way. And in the window seat of the library, their library, the place where everything had truly begun. Maren sat with a book in her lap and a secret on her lips. Hadrian found her there, as he always did, as if drawn by some invisible compass. "You're smiling," he observed, settling beside her. "That's either very good or very bad." "Very good." She took his hand, pressing it to her stomach. "The physician confirmed it this morning." He went still. "You mean, yes." The joy that broke across his face was like sunrise, brilliant, overwhelming, transforming everything it touched. Maren. Her name was a prayer. "Are you certain?" "Completely certain." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was laughing. "We're going to have a baby, Hadrian, a child of our own." He pulled her into his arms, and holding her like she was the most precious thing in the universe. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. "I love you more than I have words to express." "I know." She pulled back enough to see his face, this man who had been a stranger, then an obligation, then a revelation. "I know because you show me every day, in every glance, every touch, every choice." "I will keep showing you." His head bowed to meet hers. "Every day for the rest of our lives." Outside the library windows, autumn sunlight gilded the gardens. In the nursery, Marcus laughed at something Cordelia said. In her corner, the dowager finally allowed herself a genuine smile. And in the window seat, where it had all begun, the Duke of Ashworth and his beloved wife held each other in the quiet certainty of their impossible, extraordinary, absolutely real love. They had started as strangers, bound by guilt and obligation. They had become partners, then friends, then something neither had dared to hope for. And now, at last, they were home.